India is often touted as the world's next economic powerhouse, and as true as these claims may be, but beneath the claims lies a very dark reality. A reality marked by stress, pressure, and fatigue, and expectations so high that you feel crushed by them. What if I told you that India is well on its way to become the burnout capital of the world? In this video, we're going to unravel how long hours, cultural norms, systemic issues, and the myth of this 70-hour work week are converging into a national crisis. Now let's start with this myth that you have to work 70 hours a week. Your hustle has to outpace your neighbors, where sleep is optional. Now, according to the recent study of the Government of India's Time Use Survey, Indians work somewhere around 46 hours a week. Now, if you look at sources like Times of India and Facebook, the work hours amount to around 45 hours a week. So it's all in the same ballpark, pretty much. So the 70-hour work week is way higher than what average Indians report. So what gives? On one hand, you see the 70-hour hustle story. On the other, the official averages are much lower, hence the nuance. Because in averages, it's very difficult to guess the extremes. India has a huge informal work sector as well, which is highly unregulated. Workers here work somewhere around 40 to 60 hours a week. This averages somewhere around 50 hours a week for the informal work sector. These workers often work in exploitative conditions with minimal protections. So this 70-hour work week is basically a badge of honor, where you're trying to show off or you're trying to project it to people that you're serious about your life because you're so stressed out and burnt out. We need to understand that burnout is a sign that things have gone to the extremes. Now, if you're working hard, you expect big results, right? But the reality is often starkly different. Working for longer hours doesn't necessarily get translated into getting more things done or getting more output per hour. OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, defines hours worked as the total hours worked per worker per year. Here, India is among those countries that work for higher hours compared to many developed economies. According to one report, labor productivity in India, which is measured as GDP per working hour, is around $8. This places India far behind other economies when it comes to output per hour. So the equation is lots of hours plus low output per hour equals a huge efficiency gap. So this means that Indians are working for longer hours and they're producing much less output per hour compared to their counterparts in other parts of the world. Now let's dig a little deeper. According to one ILO-derived study, more than 51% of Indians work for more than 49 hours a week. Now why does this matter? Because working extremely long hours where the payoff per hour is low always leads to stress, diminishing returns, fatigue, and eventually burn out. So working for longer hours just isn't enough, because if you're burning a candle from both the sides, you're paying more than your fair share. And now that leads us into the human cost. What is this burnout doing to our workforce? What is it doing to their mental health? What is it doing to their relationships? And what is it doing to their quality of life? A press release from the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences states that the lifetime prevalence of a mental health disorder in India is about 13.7%. Around 10.6% of our adults are living with a diagnosable mental health disorder. In urban areas, this prevalence jumps from 10.6% to 13.5%. Even the data from the rural areas is alarming at 6.9%. A survey by wellness platform Your Dose shows that 64% of employees aged 21 to 30 are battling high stress levels in India. A recent survey based on over 2,400 consultations found out that more than 50% of all consultations are about anxiety and stress, mostly related to work. Now let's imagine a young tech professional. Let's call her Anika. She wakes up at 6:30 in the morning. She commutes for an hour. She clocks in at her office at around 9 a.m. She stays in her office till 8 p.m. and then she comes back home and finishes her pending work and gets ready for the next day. On weekends, she's just catching up. And not just that, she's missing meaningful time with her family and friends. Her sleep is disturbed, her dream project is in limbo, and she's constantly worried all the time. Until one day, she realizes that she's not actually living a life, but simply surviving. You see, burnout isn't just a buzzword. The World Health Organization defines burnout as an occupational phenomena characterized by exhaustion, reduced efficiency, and cynicism. But there's more. The story doesn't stop at mental health. It spills into family life, gender, informal sector, and hidden hours. Let's talk about the contribution of Indian women now. Women all around this country spend somewhere around 5 to 6 hours a day on unpaid work. This includes household chores, taking care of the kids and family. You see, India's workforce is heavily informal. About 94% of our workers at some point in their lives have worked for unorganized enterprises. These enterprises often lack labor protection and they don't even pay for overtime. You see, when formal sector work hours go up, the informal sector stretches even further. This often includes long shifts, multiple jobs, and weekend work. Now let's look at another worker. Let's call him Sham. Sham serves at a call center that serves US customers. His shift runs from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. After that, Sham comes home and then he does his side gigs. This means that Sham is working somewhere around 10 to 12 hours a day. On paper, his contract says 50 hours, but his actual work is much higher than 50 hours a week. You see, when you're juggling formal hours, informal labor, and family responsibilities, rest becomes a myth. Recovery disappears. Every hour accumulates fatigue and your mind and body becomes numb. Now let's widen the lens to see how culture, expectations, and our system feed into this. Burnout in India isn't just about the clocking hours, but rather it's more about the why behind those hours. Now let's unpack three overlapping forces here. The first is our culture, the second is employer expectation, and the third is systemic problems, systemic inertia, if you will. Even before we go to school, we are taught this one thing that hard work is the solution to everything. You want something, you work hard. The harder you work, the better success you shall see. That has been the talking point. And a lot of the times, a majority of us carry this mindset into our adulthood as well. This hustle becomes a badge, a badge that you want to flaunt everywhere you can. So when you leave early from work, you feel guilty. And when you take a day off, you feel like you're slacking. That turns working late into proof that you're trying, proof that you care. This also means that your bosses now expect this behavior from you because they know about this mindset. You see, in India, there's no such thing called as off work. You don't get off work. Managers just send emails and you're back to work. And weekends, what are those? They're just to catch up, finish the pending work. Remember that more than 51% of our workers work more than 49 hours a week. Yet, productivity per hour is low. That is the problem. Productivity per hour, not the number of hours. Now, despite all this pressure and stress, when the system demands for more hours, obviously it creates fatigue and eventually leads to burnout. If your company deals with international clients, your working hours will not match with theirs, leading you to work for longer hours. The pressure is never relieved, it keeps building up. Now, let's talk about the systemic failure, the systemic inertia that we have. Labor laws exist, but they are not implemented well, and that's why the informal work sector dominates. Officials warn that India's labor productivity is actually the worst among all G20 nations. So there's this assumption, the assumption that if we just add more work hours, we can, just offset this productivity issue. But that's not how things work. Historically, we've seen this over and over again. Working for long, stressful hours without proper systems, balancing things out, always, always leads to fatigue, always leads to more stress, always leads to burnout. Now let's look at another worker. His name is Raj and he's an analyst. Now that he's young and has less work experience, it is often expected from him to be indispensable. So he stays late. He works even on weekends. He avoids family, friends, and all of his personal life. He doesn't ask for leaves, and even when he does, he feels guilt. So inside his mind, this is what Raj believes, that working for long, stressful hours means living a successful life. But slowly with time, since he's not taking any breaks, the fatigue overpowers him. Then he begins to ask the important question, is this success or just survival? So all of this comes together. Long hours, hidden labor, cultural expectation, and systemic inefficiency. But what does it look like at scale? We need to study its broader impact. This question that when it comes to work environment, how does India stack up globally? Now, according to World Population Review, India's work week is somewhere around 48 hours a week, which is pretty much in the same bracket compared to the other sources that we've seen. Among large economies, this places us right at the top when it comes to working hours per week. The National Mental Health Survey found that 15% of India's adult population experiences mental health issues that needs intervention. 64% of the employees aged 21 to 30 feel high levels of stress and anxiety. Countries that have shorter working hours, for example, like that of in European nations, which have work hours somewhere between 35 to 38 hours a week, often report high productivity per hour and better work-life balance. India definitely works for longer hours, but gets less done per hour. So now we understand the issue. Long working hours, culture, employer expectation, and systemic inefficiency. All these things combine together, leading to burnout. But this story doesn't have to end here. There are a lot of things that we can implement to bring about a meaningful change, because understanding the data is one thing and acting on it is another. You see, productivity isn't just about the number of working hours, it's more about the output you provide per hour. If we reduce wasted hours and invest in better training and processes, then working hours without optimal output can be reduced. Rest isn't a sin when you need it. People have every right to disconnect from their work at weekends and reconnect with their family and friends. This is the only way to recharge the productivity battery. Doing this increases creativity, focus, and loyalty. We also need to protect hidden labor. Unpaid work and informal hours need to be brought to light. It also needs to be made sure that both formal and informal work sectors don't abuse their workforce. We also need to bring in more labor protection for the informal sector. One huge problem in our work culture is the problem of expectations. We need to move culture from if I'm not busy, I'm lazy to if I'm effective, I produce value. Leaders really need to model this. Companies and organizations need to invest in mental health support. Counseling, reasonable work hours, and flexible working often leads to less anxiety and stress. We also need to do something about the enforcement because the laws already exist, but the enforcement is terrible. This poor enforcement of labor laws is especially higher in the informal sector. So if you're a worker in India, you need to ask yourself, am I working hard to live or living to work? If you're a manager, ask, am I measuring hours or results? And if you're a citizen, ask yourself, what kind of India do we want for upcoming generations? The hustle nation or the humane nation? So here's what I'll leave you with. India doesn't need more working hours. It doesn't need us to burn out for the economy. Instead, we need a workforce that is rested, creative, and valued. Working 70 hours a week might sound like a badge of honor, but you gotta ask yourself that if you're doing this just because the system demands it or because you fear falling behind, then you're not exactly winning, are you? So let's stop glorifying exhaustion. Let's stop measuring dedication by hours. Let's build a system, companies, and a culture where doing meaningful work and living a meaningful life go hand in hand. This could be India's moment, but it doesn't have to cost her our sanity.